So my special guest today is Daniel Lorn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
My name is Daniel Lorn. I grew up in Glasgow. I won't say how many years ago that was, but yeah, X amount of years ago. And really fell in love with horror as a young kid, probably too early to fall in love with horror. I think I was about 8 years old when I managed to get hold of some of my dad's DVDs. DVDs, it would have been VHSs or Betamax at the time, I apologise.
Yeah.
Dracula, Frankenstein, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So I used to kind of sneak them into the video player when I was too young and sort of watch them when I shouldn't have been watching them. And that was my journey started, really. I just fell in love with it from that moment. From there, I started to read a lot of books. Maybe I was about 10 years old when I read my first book by Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
Telltale Heart. I didn't understand it at the time. I was obviously too young, but there was just something about the writing that I don't know. I connected with the sort of writing style of Edgar Allan Poe, and then consequently started to read a lot of books from the older authors, the sort of classic authors, M.R. James, H.P. Lovecraft. When I was way too young to be doing this. So time went on anyway. I got a job, a career, and so I still watched horror, still read books, but I didn't really start writing until 2 years ago. So quite a while since I became obsessed with it. But even though I wasn't writing, it was quite weird. I was always kind of making stories up in my head, and then sometimes I would write them down. Sometimes I'd have really vivid dreams, and again I would just go ahead and write things down. So I kept this book like a journal, and I kept it secret from anyone that I knew. And I've still got it. It's just full of these sort of story ideas that I never intended to go back and sort of write them. It was just so that I could remember these memories, these dreams, these kind of imagination. And then, let's say 3 years ago, I think I was watching a horror movie, and it was I couldn't even tell you the name of it. It was such a forgettable horror movie. And the ending for me of this particular horror movie, something just clicked inside me, and I thought that would have had a better ending. Yeah. And then started to pick holes in things, like from that moment, pick holes in books that I was reading, just plot holes. Maybe that should have went this way. And then I had this sort of argument going on in my head, and then eventually I just sat down and wrote a story from nowhere. There was no preparation for it. There was no sort of kind of thought process. I just thought, I'm going to sit down and write some of these stories that I've been keeping in this book. And that's how my sort of journey started. I had a career for about 22 years between, obviously, leaving school and then starting my horror writing journey. And didn't write a thing throughout that time. My career was very different. There was no writing involved with it. Nothing like this, nothing using your imagination. So it must have been something that was always there, just waiting for the right time. 3 years ago was the right time for me.
Yeah, I do think that we have all these ideas in our head, and then eventually it just snaps, doesn't it? And just you've got to get them down, you've got to get them out there.
This is it. And I got married it was 8 years ago. So it was way before I started to write. And then my wife is the only person that I told about this book. And she was quite very interested in it. I suppose she has to be. She's my wife, But she did show a lot of support for it. And she's like, maybe you should write these down one day. So I have to thank my wife for being part of the process, for getting me sort of motivated. And then once my career ended, I had a bit of time just to sit about and do nothing. And that was it. Yeah, I just kind of sat and picked the first story that I'd written down, and it was actually a story about my experience with sleep paralysis. That was the sort of first one that I put together.
Yeah. So how do you come up with the dark and eerie settings in your stories?
So most of the settings and atmospheres in the story are from memory of growing up in Glasgow when things were quite rough, quite dark, quite unsettling. The streets where I grew up were quite rough.
Yeah.
So there was no sort of Dracula, Frankenstein, but there was other monsters within the vicinity, sort of unseen, that created that sort of dark atmosphere that I became accustomed to as a child. You know, you were like scared to go down certain streets, scared to go through the park. And then that fear sort of translated into my imagination and then manifested into what could be behind that fear. You know, the fear was generated from obviously the fear of being attacked or, I say it's quite a rough area. But my imagination quickly filled that with like ghosts, ghouls, spectres, other bits and bobs. And that all stayed with me. Those memories stayed with me very vividly. So whenever I'm creating my sort of atmospheres, I draw quite heavily on that, on my imagination as a child, how I felt, what scared me, and then I try and make the horror that I write semi-believable, because that's the type of horror that scares me.
Yeah.
I love all sorts of horror, as I'm sure you do as well. I have my favourites, but when it comes to horror that actually scares me, it needs to be something that I can sort of believe in. You know, there's a little bit of a believability to it, and that then strikes the fear in me. And once I put myself in that mindset, that allows me to create that kind of horror. So I generally just write the type of horror that would instill that fear in me.
So what horror authors have influenced you the most?
So the horror authors that have influenced me the most, I would say, if I was to pick one, it would be M.R. James. He's one of the older authors that I tend to read. He wrote a lot of ghost stories. I think he first started writing in the late 1800s, and he wrote right through the 1900s to about 1940, 1947. So his style of writing, that's my biggest influence, I believe. Like M.R. James, H.P. Lovecraft, second to that. I just love the way Lovecraft sort of constructs his horror, the way he writes. So it's generally all the old-fashioned, the classic writers, the sort of, and a few of the unknowns. That's the biggest draw. I tend to steer clear of like Stephen King, the massive horror talent in a lot of people's eyes, but I think everyone knows Stephen King, so by reading Stephen King's work, I wouldn't want to become influenced by someone that famous, their writing, their sort of writing style.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Stephen King imitators out there that I've seen. So I want to try and create something original with my writing. So just by drawing on all these old classics, it just allows me to kind of interpret that and make it a bit more current, because some of the books from the 1890s and 1910s, some of them I've read, when you read them, they're quite hard to interpret. So you have to almost put a modern spin on them. And that's what I try and create. But yeah, certainly M.R. James, if I was to pick one person, it would be M.R. James.
Yeah. So what's the most challenging aspect of writing horror for you?
For myself, I would say it's just finding time to do it, really. All the ideas are there. It's just finding time, and that's something that I'm trying to work out a pattern that I can invest more time in it. Sometimes I'll try to do it when everyone's asleep, and that tends to work sometimes, but sometimes you're too tired to motivate yourself. But if I've got a really good idea in my head, I can just sit down for several hours. I can stay up all night and just see it through to the end. So I'll tend to write my story from start right through to the end if I've got a good enough investment in that particular story. But yeah, it's just time, really, trying to find the time. And then so writing's the fun part. The part I find challenging, because I think it's quite frustrating, is the editing. Just going back through it several hundred times to make sure that it's kind of working and it's tight. So yeah, editing. I'm not a big fan of editing, but it's a necessary evil, and it makes sense to get it right.
I know I'm not a fan of editing. I think that might be something that we have to unfortunately deal with. I think a lot of authors probably feel the same, and a lot of authors probably love doing the editing. It's just, I think it's just one of those things.
It's exactly. I mean, do you do your own editing for your stories, or do you send that away?
I do my own editing, but I do have to, I think, send some stuff away. Because I think I get too familiar with what I've written.
This is it, and then it's like you almost can't see the woods for the trees.
That's it.
And sometimes, like, I'll send it away. I've got a few friends that I've met through the writing community, the horror writing in the community, and sometimes I'll send them through to have a once over. And then when they come back with that second set of eyes, you're almost embarrassed that you've missed some of the things that gets picked up, because you're, like you say, you're maybe too close to it.
Yeah.
So I think that was a learning curve for me. You may think the book's ready, but it's important to get as many people to check it out, because they can just pick out continuity errors, something you've just overlooked because you've spent too much time with it. But yeah, editing, it's a tough call, but that's part of the process. Not fun.
I know. So have you ever scared yourself with something that you've written?
So the first story that I wrote, is See You Later, it was called. That was the personal story, the one about my sleep paralysis. That was quite a dark time. Looking back at my childhood, that was quite a dark, scary time. So to revisit those memories with that story, it actually triggered me to have sleep paralysis again. I've not had it for such a long time, but just being faced with those memories and drawn, because I wanted to make that story as believable as possible, even though it's paranormal, supernatural. I wanted to try and make that as believable for the reader. Because to me, pretty much when I was younger, lying in bed, going through that experience, it was real to me. So I wanted to try and translate that to the page. So therefore, if it wasn't scaring me, then it wasn't ready. But yeah, that was the one story that I'm glad I've written that and it's done, because I'm going to steer clear now of writing such personal stories, because it's hard to disconnect from them. And yeah, that was the one, I think, that it struck the fear in me, gave me some sleepless nights. And that was my first attempt as well at writing horror. So I was quite obsessed by it, spent a lot of time with that story. And then when I wrote it, I just put it in the shelf for about a year, because I knew that your first attempt at writing isn't going to be great. So I put that in the shelf, and I thought I'm going to come back to that once I've got a bit more experience. And that's what I did. So I came back to that last year, re-edited it last year, and that's when I was getting the sleep paralysis yet again. So pretty much every time I pick this book up and read it, to have a look at it and edit it, I go through the same process.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's going to translate. Well, it has indeed translated to several readers, but that was the plan with that, just to make it quite a scary, unsettling time for the reader.
Yeah, I suppose if you've gone through that experience before yourself, it is going to bring the same sort of experiences back, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And so, I mean, writing for me is kind of, it's almost like an escape from reality. I mean, reality is good. I've got a good life, I'm happy. But everyone gets negative feelings that kind of flood their mind at the most random times. Well, I hope so. I hope it's not just me. So for me, writing's almost like a therapy. So all that nonsense that jumbles up in your head, I think that's quite important as a writer, especially a horror writer, just to put it down on the page. And it feels quite rewarding afterwards. Although I will say, writing See You Later, that wasn't rewarding. My other stories, they were completely different story altogether to write those. They were quite fun to write. So yeah, I'm starting to enjoy it a bit more now, and I'll just need to stay away from those personal memories.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of authors have said that they do find that writing is therapeutic.
Yeah.
And they find it as an outlet to sort of like let go of some of those personal experiences and traumas. So yeah, you're not alone.
Yeah.
I do think that it is something that does run throughout. And I mean, as authors, we do write about our personal experiences.
Yeah. That's the best way to kind of to make something believable on the page, is to kind of have some sort of experience or some sort of connection to it. Otherwise, you're just guessing. That's what I think. So there is always a sort of personal angle to it, but the situations in that story, like pretty much, I would say 90% of that book was real. It was from sort of some of the bad things that happened back then, you know. So it was literally just like almost like a biography sort of thing in some places, but
yeah,
made it more of a fiction-based retelling of sleep paralysis. But yeah, the rest of it, I believe you've got to have some sort of experience in order to paint your atmosphere and make it believable.
Yeah, it makes it more realistic, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any like unique rituals that you do before you write?
So depending on the story, so if the story excites me, then I don't need any sort of ritual. I'll just kind of, I suppose it is a ritual. So if the story excites me, I'll just, once everyone's in bed, I'll just plan that I'm going to stay up probably all night, just trying to get down the entire story in one go. Obviously, it's not going to be written very well. It's just to get the whole elements of the story down, and then I'll leave that for about 2 weeks. So yeah, I suppose that is a sort of ritual that I've fallen into with those types of story. If it's a story that's a slow burner, then I just make sure that I try and get 1 hour per day allocated to that story. If I'm struggling to get in the mood for it, then I'll just pick sort of some sort of ambient music. I'll get some ambient music on that. So if I'm talking about a story that's maybe starting with a train journey, I'll just stick on some sort of ambient train journey music, and that just in the mood to get the book started or to get that chapter started. So yeah, music definitely helps to get me in the mood. But yeah, other than that, if it's a connection to a story, the story writes itself. I just need to be there and be ready to type and be ready to stay up all night with loads of coffee.
Yeah, coffee.
That's it, yeah.
So have you had any memorable reactions from your readers?
Yeah, so I'll go back to See You Later. So See You Later was shelved for a good year. And I thought I need to practice writing. I need to kind of find my sort of writing rhythm. So I wrote a book. It was a novelette called Obsession, and it was a first-person story about this individual that's quite detached from society, quite deranged, and it was quite worrying that I found this quite an easy story to write. I wrote it in maybe, I think, 6 hours. I wrote the entire novelette in 6 hours. And I couldn't wait to sit. I couldn't now sit on this for 2 weeks. I became obsessed with this book. So for a whole week, I basically didn't get much sleep. I was just up, as soon as people my family went to bed, I was on the laptop just typing this story. So I think it took me a week to actually make it seem like a sort of believable story. Yeah. It's quite a dark psychological horror. It really is, probably one of the darker works, quite believable. And because I'm not published yet, no one had read it except me. Now, I couldn't let my wife read this book. It's not the sort of thing I would like people that I know to read. It's just, in my opinion, quite dark, unsettling. And because none of my friends or family know that I do this sort of work, I wasn't confident that this was ready for publication yet. Yeah. So I sent it out to a few people because I just joined Twitter. I didn't have any social media presence or anything. So all I had was Twitter, and I was following some of the authors that I like. And this story ended up on Reddit, so I put it on Reddit and forgot about it. And I think it was like a week later, I'd forgotten about it, so I put it in Reddit, put it into some other sort of areas for people to read. And I got a ping on my phone from YouTube, and I was getting all these messages. And so that story, Obsession, made it onto, have you heard of Dr. Creepin?
No.
So Dr. Creepin's one of the sort of creepypasta. He's quite a huge following. So he narrated that story, Obsession, and although it was only in maybe its first draft, it's now on draft 10. It's been published. So that was the first draft of Obsession, and I'd never had any sort of feedback on my stories yet. And that got some serious traction on that channel. I think it's up to about 20,000 views, 20,000 likes, all that. And that was the start. So, and I was getting emails in. So very quickly, I was getting emails, or Twitter was filling up. So I had to very quickly create a website so that I could interact, because that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? If starting off as a writer, you kind of want that interaction. You want the readers to enjoy your work and ask about it. Yeah, and I was getting some really pleasing comments about this story. They've never had anything like it. It was written really well. It was professional, and that was the moment for me where I thought, yeah, this is something I'm going to do now. But yeah, that was the moment there. That story, it continues to get significant praise, more praise than any of my other stories. I think it's just because it's quite a raw story. No one edited it. It's only me that's seen it. No one's proofread it. But so yeah, the first version is still out there. The first edit of Obsession is still out there on YouTube. I have listened to it, and because my writing's changed significantly since then, I can't help but listen to it and think, oh, that's too wordy. It's I don't like it. But Dr. Creepin's got a really deep, sort of kind of dramatic voice, so he's done a good job with that story. So I think he actually covers up a lot of the errors that I then went back and corrected prior to publication. But yeah, it was getting some fantastic feedback. There was people messaging me about the ending, saying what was happening to that ending. That was so sinister, so scary. There was some comments that people were getting that suffered like PTSD. They maybe put some negative comments on there because it sort of triggered them. And there was a few comments to get the story taken down because it was too dark. And I just thought, well, that's exactly what I wanted to achieve with this, to create a dark story where readers can go in there and enjoy it and spend an hour just being scared. So yeah, I would say Obsession was the main one that continues to get that pleasing feedback.
That's brilliant. So how has the horror genre evolved over the years, in your opinion?
It's definitely evolved, and it's continuing to evolve. There's a lot more variety out there, I've noticed. So I've started to read quite a lot this year, and I just can't keep up with it. There's just so much diversity there. There's horror for literally everything. For diet, there's horror for diet, for going to the gym. The extreme horror genre is just blew up. I think it's evolved. I think it's spread out now. There's no leading charge. I don't think there's any sort of leading subgenre for horror now. I think it's kind of spread out now, and I think each subgenre of horror now has got an equal amount of sort of people that love it and enjoy it. The extreme horror is something that I've become a bit attracted to over the past few months. I didn't know that existed until last year. I did not know extreme horror existed. But then when I started to read it, I do enjoy reading at least one extreme horror book each month. It's not the type of genre that I tend to write in, although I have got a few stories planned for that genre. Yeah. I just think it's became more acceptable. People are just getting more confident. They're thinking outside the box with it. Psychological horrors, I think that's fantastic horror genre just now. People are bringing their own feelings in there and trying to actually portray or making horror from maybe something negative that happened to them in life, and they're creating this sort of horror book. Some people are writing true horror. So about horror, about body dysmorphia, about transgender. I've seen people writing about their experience going through the change, and it's such an interesting genre horror. And I think it's not obviously there's not a lot of decent horror, dare I say it, to watch on TV, to watch on movies. I think the real horror living within these indie authors, all these sort of weird and wonderful horrors that are coming up from nowhere, from people that have got no followers. You know, I've read some stories from people that have maybe had a story out for 2 years and no one's read it, no one's kind of gave it any stars. I've went away and read it just because it's just sitting there, no one's checked out.
Yeah.
I thought that's a 5-star read, and it's very rare that I'll give a story a 5-star read unless I think people need to read this. This is fantastic, and some of those 5-star reads are coming from people that are unknown. So I think that's where it's evolved. There's more and more people thinking about it, try to do something different with it, and yeah, I'm loving it. It's fantastic. My Kindle's filled with books that I'm dying to read, and I'll never get around to reading them. So it's blew up. I think horror in the indie genre, in the indie fraternity, is massively blown up.
Yeah, it has. I think it's just going to get bigger as well.
It's going to, and the fact that people are self-publishing. I mean, there's a few self-published authors that have done really well when they've made it. Some of them are great, in my opinion, but what one person thinks is great horror, another person might think that's rubbish. So there's a lot of that. So you see that when you go into people's review pages and they're getting 1 stars, they're getting 5 stars. I just think that's really interesting. And it doesn't, a 1-star review is not going to put me off, reading a book. It's just, I'll just continue reading all the stories that are out there that I can, and trying to support the indie authors, because like I say, there's so many 5-star reads out there that are not getting noticed. And then you watch the amount of, I'll say it, rotten horror movies getting made, and you think, what is going on? There's so many gems amongst this community, but we're putting that onto the TV. But that's another story.
Yeah, I agree about the movies. There's not really been any decent horror movies that I've seen. I was very disappointed with the Nun 2.
See, I didn't even watch the Nun 2. I mean, I'm probably going to watch it, and I'm going to enjoy it. It's going to have good atmospherics, but it's not. It's sometimes the story, you think, come on, there's gems of stories out there that will blow people away, and they're just investing all this money. I mean, some of them are good, but the majority of them are trash, I'll be honest. I don't know what it is. Maybe that's just my opinion, but that's one of the reasons I started to write. So personally, I write stories for me, and if I enjoy them, I hope other people enjoy them as well.
Yeah. Do you think, like horror authors, as writers, we expect a lot more from films? Because we obviously write the horror, so we expect to be scared ourselves. Yet that's going to be a hard feat anyway. Potentially. I mean, I grew up watching horror movies, and I still love the old ones. I think the 80s had some fantastic horror movies. Maybe it's just because I'm getting a little bit older now, and the sort of horror that's been put into kind of the theatres and the movie, maybe they're just trying to translate that to kind of please the sort of masses, like people-pleasing horror. But yeah, a lot of horror doesn't scare me, and I think that's been lost a little bit in the movies. Some of the movies are quite scary, but they're only really scary if you're going to believe in it. And I don't think horror movies are generally there to scare people as much anymore. I think they're more there for shock value, and that's fine. I'm shocked, but I just want to see more horror movies that get under my skin and and frighten me. And I only really get that from books. It's only really books that give me that sort of fear. But yeah, I do think that maybe if you're starting to write horror, you tend to analyse things a lot more, and then that takes away a little bit of your enjoyment. Yeah. Okay, so what advice would you give to an aspiring horror writer?
So I would say, if you're an aspiring horror writer, you've just got to practice writing. I wouldn't be too tied up with, editing or trying to create the perfect sort of story. Just write stories, and you will get better at it. It's like I say, I wrote See You Later, and I was lucky that I didn't release that because it just wasn't ready. Gave it a good year on the shelf because I knew that my writing wasn't, I couldn't create a decent story with the level of writing I had. But it didn't take me long. It took me about a year to become comfortable writing and to get some good feedback on the writing. So it doesn't take long. I mean, a year's not that long in the grand scheme, but you just got to keep writing. Get involved with one of the communities. I mean, I'm only really on Twitter. That was pretty good when I started. It's now not as good. And you just need to go on Twitter, have an active Twitter profile, or I would say now maybe Facebook's better. There's other bits, there's other, Instagram. And you've just got to connect with the kind of indie writers, indie authors. Read, just constantly read as much as you can in the horror world. Read horror that you would never normally read horror romance, read every single genre of horror, because that's just going to make you a better writer, because you're going to see how these people structure stories, and that's all going to translate. So I had a few questions about some friends the other week saying, do you need to have a qualification to be a writer? Do you need to go and do a course? No, if you want to be a writer, then it's sort of already in you. You just need to practice. It's art. So some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. So if you want to be sort of semi-successful, if you want people to read your books and get some feedback, you've got to accept that not everyone's going to love your work as much as you love it. But yeah, just keep writing, read loads, and have some kind of broad shoulders, because people don't care what they write online. They may say, you may think they've put maybe a bad review for your story, and you might think because you're quite innocent, you're quite maybe new to it all, or that's going to ruin at the end of it. It's not. Some of the best authors in every single author, I would say, has got thousands of 1-star reviews, and they're still making it successful. You've just got to keep going with it, keep practicing, keep writing. Join a kind of group where you can maybe get some feedback for some of your work, and you just keep going forward and enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, it was great having you here on the show.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, just thank you very much for setting this up. I've seen that you've set up the YouTube channel. I think it's a great idea, just to get people talking about horror. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me along.
You're very welcome.
This is the first time I've actually spoken about this sort of stuff. So yeah, quite nerve-wracking to actually just be speaking to somebody about it, but at the same time, yeah, a great experience, and thank you very much.
And there is one question I forgot to ask you.
Okay.
Do you have any upcoming projects or releases that you're excited about?
Yeah, so I've got several releases that I'm working on just now. They're really slow burners. So one that I plan to release one for Halloween, but it's not going to be ready yet. And that's the beauty of being an indie author. You can set your own deadlines. Yeah. So I've got it's called Sins of the Wronged, and this is probably going to be my most sort of extreme horror. It's part psychological horror, part extreme horror, and it's a totally new writing style for me as well. So that should be ready for December. That's probably going to be my proudest work. I've spent about a year on this one now, and it's only a novella. It's not a novel. It's just a kind of novella. Yeah. But I've just spent a lot of time on this, so I'm looking forward to getting that one out there. And then I'm taking a bit of an extreme route as well. So after that, I've got an extreme horror coming out in April called Meathead, and that's basically a horror story that is going to be involved with the guys in the gym that are trying to bulk up, get massive, eating as much food as they can. So that's something I'm looking forward to. I used to work as a personal trainer, so I'm looking forward to injecting any knowledge I've picked up into this extreme horror book to try and make it believable. Yeah. And yeah, I've got a few more in the pipeline, but that's the two that are going to be out next: Sins of the Wronged and Meathead.
Fantastic. Well, again, I'm really sorry for forgetting that question. I do apologise.
No problem. That's fine.
Important. But yeah, it's been great having you on the show. So I hope everything goes well with the releases and it all goes perfect for you.
That's great. Thank you, Crystal.